Welcome to Practice Disrupted, a podcast where we find ways to create new solutions to current challenges while elevating the value of architects. I'm your host, Evelyn Lee, an architect who spans tech as an angel investor, startup advisor, and founder of Practice of Architecture. Whether you're a seasoned architect or just starting in the field, this podcast is your gateway to think differently about the role architects play within our global community. Hello, Disruptors. Welcome to this week's episode of Practice Disrupted. Today, we're diving into the intersection of architecture, visual storytelling, and creative direction with Obiekwe Okolo, also known as Obi. Obi is a Nigerian-American photographer, multimedia artist, and the creative director at Bittersweet Creative. He also serves as the arts and culture editor for Bittersweet Monthly, where he explores the power of narrative and design to drive meaningful dialogue. Obi's journey started in architecture, but his curiosity led him to portraiture, documentary photography, and writing, fields where he continues to explore identity, culture, and the reconciliation of humanity. His work spans exhibitions, publications, and community-driven creative initiatives, showcasing a unique blend of artistic vision and strategic leadership. In this conversation, we unpack what it means to transition from architecture into creative direction, how his architectural education influences his work, and the value architects bring to creative industries beyond traditional practice. We'll also discuss the future of creative professions in the age of AI and his insights for those considering unconventional career paths. Let's get into it. Hello, Obi. Welcome to the show. We're so glad to have you on Practice Disrupted.
I'm so glad to be here.
It's been a while. You and I were talking about kind of when we first met, and you are a past AIAS vice president. What is interesting to me, probably less interesting to all of you, is how many past presidents and vice presidents have actually gone on to stay within the profession or going on to pursue a new career. We don't have to go all the way that far back in your history if you don't want to, but I'd love for you to talk about a little bit about what you did or what you are doing today, and then maybe we might back into it from there.
Yeah, so today I am a practicing artist and a creative director for a full-service creative agency called Bittersweet Creative. We also have a nonprofit storytelling arm and media company called Bittersweet Monthly, and a product and publishing company called Bittersweet Collective that we publish books and create fun, sort of hope-orienting products through. So I wear a lot of hats in that sense. I guess that thing has not changed and maybe will never change. But yeah, that's what I'm currently doing.
I think a lot of people have an idea of what a creative director is or does. Can you give us your definition? And it's easiest to take you through a day in the life of whatever's easiest to understand.
The day in the life is shockingly unsexy, but fun. I think the best way to define it is sort of, for me at least, is how I came to the definition myself, which was from architecture. I kind of always joke that, not joke, this is real, I would never trade my architecture education for anything, but I would have really loved to know earlier all that education could have afforded me and given me access to. Because when I decided to leave the profession and looked at the landscape and looked at the things that I loved to do, I knew I loved storytelling. I've always been more interested in translating architecture for the public than I was in practicing it for myself. I've always loved narrative. I've always loved photography and sort of the interplay of all of these different mediums to connect humanity to itself. And in looking at that landscape of my interests and skill sets, I kind of sort of discovered this title of creative director and realized pretty quickly that all I was doing was the thing I was taught to do in architecture school, which is to take a concept that is just an idea and make sure that that creative concept and that creative idea speaks the same language or is communicated from master plan to doorknob. That's functionally what I think an architect does outside of, compliance and all the other stuff that exists. But the work of the design craft of architecture is taking an idea and seeing it through a scale. And that's functionally what I do every day as a creative director. I come in at the beginning and we have these ideas, these concepts, these schematics. The clients ask us to develop for them. And then the next ask is to help them see it through and make sure that at scale, at human scale, at customer scale, that same idea is still felt. And I think that's kind of what a creative director does.
So you just talked a little bit about how you never wanted to practice architecture, but you wanted to be in a place where you could potentially tell stories of architecture. Obviously, you're telling stories about a lot of different things. Now, what was that transition like for you to kind of realize that you don't want to practice in a traditional sense? And what was the search for then? What was next?
Yeah, I think it started early. I think my junior year of high school was the first time that actually it was noticed in me by a professor, Mark Blizzard, who I believe is still teaching at University of Texas in San Antonio. But he sort of just noted during a critique that the way that I presented my work was a lot less about the technical space and what the space was, and a lot more about sort of what the space evoked and what the human experience would be in the space, which UTSA is a very construction forward technical design program. So I think that probably stood out in that pool of people. I wasn't super interested in sort of drawing or crafting or building details. I wasn't super interested in systems at all. It really, for me, just kind of began and end in the human experience in the building. So junior year is probably when I first started to sort of like, oh, this maybe is not what I want to do forever, at least as it was presented. And then senior year, I served as South Quad director for AIS and was elected into the AIS VP position. And that just gave me this like 10,000 foot view of the entire profession. And that was when it sort of began to start to codify for me, because what I was seeing was that much of the profession, the places where I would end up most immediately would require me to sacrifice that part of myself that was really interested in this sort of human sensual sensory experience in space and how to create that and cultivate that and curate that. And I just was bored with the idea of not doing that. So fortunately, my AISVP tenure gave me a year to kind of make a salary, have a job, and not have to practice architecture and continue to discover. And I got to stare at architecture a lot in that time and engage with practitioners. I was also on the ACSA board through my sort of board position with AIS. So I got to look back at the education to like confirm that what I was feeling now is what I was sort of seeing then, whether I knew it or not. It very much did confirm it. So as I'm looking back and looking forward in this AISVP position, I was like, okay, cool. I know pretty clearly that I don't necessarily want to go there. But, and it kind of became my accidental purview and rally cry. While I was in my tenure, there was a lot of conversation about the alternative career paths. I think that was the word we were using at the time. I don't know if that's still there. But that kind of became my accidental rally cry. And I was sort of the guy who was just like stump speeching that over and over and over again. And the more that I talked about it, it seemed the less people cared to hear about it. And I was really, selfishly trying to make a place for myself when I was all done with this. So that's kind of what I was doing. And that didn't really take hold. So I left the VP position. The next logical step was to go into a firm because you don't want to waste all the relationships and the contacts that you've made. So I did that, joined a firm, OPX, here in DC, in DuPont Circle. And it was a sort of a workplace strategy architecture A&E firm. And did the conventional sort of like associate or design associate or whatever the title is thing for about 6 months, and then approached my boss and said, hey, we don't really have a marketing team. One of the other partners was doing it basically by himself. And I was like, I think I could be really good at that. Let me do that instead. And he said, yeah, let's rock that, because there was a need. So I rebranded the studio. I redesigned the website. I basically was handed the keys to the city, to this, like, I think now 30-year-old firm or something, and got to flex a lot of muscles that I'd never really used before. I also rebranded AIS while I was there. So like that was my first experience of like creative directing for a full brand. So I got to flex that muscle again. And then I was sort of like hooked. I was like, yeah, I want to do this. I want to design capital D. I don't want to architect capital A. And I kind of never turned back after doing that for OPX for about another 6 months, maybe 8 months. I think I was at OPX for like 14 months total. So time's weird. But I again approached my boss, and he was like, I don't know if you really want to be here. And I had sort of started taking up some small clients and small side design work at the time. And I was like, you know what? I don't think I do either. And he's like, well, how about we pay you to leave? So I was like, oh. I think there was some interest to the firm at the time as well too, because things were slowing down a little bit. So got let go, and that sort of thrust me into entrepreneurship and starting my own design shop here in DC. And I kind of made myself a creative director because there was no one else to do it.
So I'm looking at your LinkedIn, and you ended up, is yours truly hotel? Do you want to even talk about that at all, or?
Yeah, I'd love to talk about that. It is a painful story, but also a really sort of fruitful and an important piece of the narrative here. I had cut my teeth as sort of an independent practitioner, entrepreneur, whatever you want to call it, in the hospitality space in DC, restaurants and hotels. And one of my clients was Johnny Sparrow, who has a restaurant in Georgetown called Reverie. And my wife and I used to spend a lot of time, my then girlfriend, now wife, and I used to spend a lot of time at Reverie. And I would oftentimes just work from the restaurant during prep because I loved him. I loved the restaurant space and ethos and the energy, and it was very creative for me. So one day we're sitting at the bar, and we're sitting next to this gentleman named Kirk Kellaway, and we're just talking as we often do. And I think our bartender that night was Susie, and we were friends with her. So we were talking to Susie, and Kirk overhears the conversation, leans over and asks me just a bunch of questions about DC and DC scene. And then he eventually asked me for my email address. I give him my email address. And then within like a week later or so, he emails me and effectively offers me a job as the creative and culture director for Brookfield Hospitality, specifically to open a new hotel property in a city called Yours Truly, which was set to open March of 2020. So after much angst about whether or not I wanted to have a boss again, I had been running wild and free for 6 years at this point, and had made a really fun life for myself and really loved where I was. So it was a lot of conversations, and ultimately I said yes for a lot of reasons. It was an incredible playground. Another sort of like keys to the city conversation, where this is a major investment private equity ownership group that is just branching into hospitality for the first time, I guess for the second time technically. And they were saying, you're someone who's working the city in the creative space. What do you think the city needs creatively? How do we make that in the living room condition in a hotel? And so it was designing programming, which was my sort of first foray into that. And fortunately not my last. It was my foray back into space and architecture, weirdly enough, because they had effectively just began began making the space what they wanted to. And I got to speak into that a lot, working with a firm out of Chicago called Simone Nibiri. And then, long story short, we're moving, we're chugging along. Everything's going really well. I'm learning new skills. I'm meeting new people. I've built out my team, which is the first time that I've had a team of people. I was sort of wrapped into the food and beverage department. So we're hiring staff, we're hiring and we're training. And then March rolls around, and I want to say like March 11th, I came in. And March 12th, I came in, and they let us know we were going to be laying off the entire staff. So got called in to do that. And that was my first sort of like, you're a leader now, you get to do the ugly stuff too. So that sucked. And then March 13th, all the directors came in and they let us know that we would also be laid off. Yeah, that's the Yours Truly story.
But now you're at Bittersweet Creative. So it's interesting to me how you did the solo entrepreneur thing so successfully. And you actually found, at least when I was watching you through all of our social media connections, a lot of different sources of revenue, be it working with brands on their own or even doing your own art and showing your art, and maybe even a few commissions along the way. So what made you want to go back to working for a company? What was so compelling about Bittersweet?
It was the ethos and the culture of Bittersweet. And then also the life stage of, I proved to myself that I can do it by myself. And then I kind of felt like I wanted to prove to myself that I could do it with other people. That felt just as important to me. And one cannot forsake the value of security in every 2 week paycheck that you don't have to find under a rock somewhere. It just comes to you. So I think a combination of all of those things. It had to be Bittersweet. It wasn't going to be anywhere else. It was time. And I also, one of the things I don't tell you about being an entrepreneur is that you don't have the built-in mechanism of professional development. You have to go find it. and it can be really hard to find mentors, natural peers who are ahead of you or at different professional stages. And I was reaching that point where I was like, all right, cool. Again, I know what I can do by myself, but what can I do with a team? And yeah, the time was right.
And how has your role evolved and grown over time at Bittersweet? It seems like the company itself keeps evolving and growing. So
It does. So my joining was sort of a pivot, like a not to say that I evolved it, but the time I joined and the reason I joined was sort of a pivotal evolution moment for the company. And it started with, as it often does, my now boss, then friend, Kate, still friend, by the way, now boss and friend, then just friend. Kate asked me if I would be willing to rebrand Bittersweet. It was her project. It was about 11 years old at that point, I think, or maybe that was the 10-year anniversary, and it was just time. And I said yes, because this was 2020, and everything was hard and money wasn't coming in. So I rebranded Bittersweet. That's where we started, which was a wonderful exercise. As I did that, I discovered really what it was fully. So I was sort of like investigating for the process and also for myself. After that process finished, she asked me if I'd stick around part time just to do some, creative consulting and direction work for clients, her clients, their clients. And I said, yeah, that sounds great. Again, a little bit more security at a very insecure time. And then she offered me the job, and she offered me the job with a caveat that was a huge ego check. I say that now because I see it for what it was now. At the time, I was really kind of hurt and confused and afraid. But she asked me to come on full time, and then she asked me if I would come on full time as a creative manager. And again, like I hadn't really. I gave myself a creative director title. No one ever gave it to me. I didn't, quote unquote. I think I had earned it, but it hadn't been externally validated by the marketplace, if you will. So I came home to my wife Maggie, and I was like, "This is what she wants. This is ridiculous." Da 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 da. I've been doing this. Look at my portfolio. This, that, and the third. And I don't remember exactly what Maggie said, but the conversation very much de-escalated, and it basically was just like, "Look, dude, she doesn't know you from Adam. To make you a director of her company, sorry, she doesn't know you professionally from Adam. To make you a director of her company on day one, in a very insecure time for the entire market, that's just a silly notion." And also, you're at that point, I was 28. It's like, you're 28. Like, you got so much time. Like, where are you going, kid? And it kind of was just a very humbling moment. I don't think she did it to humble at me. I think she did it because it was what was right for the company. And I think she knew at some level that it was what was right for me. But yeah, so I took that, and I did the best I could with that, and did it well. And, another thing I love about Bittersweet is the understanding that sort of the whole person is who you're hiring. So there's understanding from day one that any of the work that I do outside of Bittersweet is sort of serving my creative work within Bittersweet as well, which is a nice freedom to have. But yeah.
And now you've officially earned the title.
Now, 3 years, 5 years in, 2 years in, I earned the title, and we're rocking. So yeah.
Why don't you talk a little bit about, you alluded just now to the things that you do outside of Bittersweet. And I like individuals like yourself because I truly believe it's hard for any one job to fulfill all the many things that individuals are passionate about anyways, especially from a creative standpoint. So what are you doing outside of Bittersweet?
Whew, what am I doing outside? Okay, so for the last 3 years, I've been host of a creative community here in DC called Creative Mornings. It's about a 4-ish thousand person sort of creative volunteer community. Can't get away from volunteering, apparently. The AIA bug thing, it's forever in us. So I've been the host for that for the last 3 years. I just handed it over to our new host. I'm very excited about being able to pass the baton. It's a global network, and yeah, so I got to I had the fun task of bringing us back after the pandemic. Learned a lot of fun. I also am practicing my own work, doing a lot of writing. My work is sort of multimedia in that I do, photography, photo manipulation, analog photography, and writing. So I just wrapped up a residency at Capitol Hill Arts Workshop and a show, a 1-month exhibition. I had another show earlier this year. My wife and one of our best friends and I also sort of curate and produce galleries around the city. We had one in February called Grandma's House. And then, a more quiet project that I'm working on is starting up a coffee company with two friends of mine who are also artists. That is going to be really, really interesting. So
amazing. Is it brick and mortar too, in addition to the coffee product?
No, thank
you.
Commercial real estate in DC is a no-go for me.
I just didn't know if you had any of the architecture bug back in you to.
Oh, it's so in me. It's not going anywhere. I want to so badly. Like I've got a concept I'm working on right now in my head that I'm probably going to start off kind of doing in our living room and in our kitchen, just because I want to work with space. I want to work in space. I still love space, as a lot of our clients are talking about fully virtual events. I'm the one saying absolutely not. It's never going to work. I don't care how virtual or fun your event. I don't care what box of stuff you ship to your staff members across the country to make it more fun. It's not going to work the same way. I'm still very much a big fan of space. What I'm not a fan of is a city where, the average commercial real estate costs $32 a square foot, because that is just an anvil strapped to your ankles when you're doing business, and it makes it near impossible to build a sustainable business. So until I'm in a place where that number has changed, or in an economic season where DC doesn't look like that, I don't think brick and mortar is in the future. I've done it already too in the space. I've had a studio in the city twice now. I was involved in a project 2021 called The 12, a developer, and sort of approached myself and a dear friend, Lori, about they're basically giving us a 2,200 square foot space to do whatever we wanted with. And we sort of came together with 12 artists and activated it for a full year as a retail gallery experience, gathering space, third place city living room thing. So yeah, I love it. I love space, but until it's possible, it's not possible.
Enjoying the show? Join a community of fellow disruptors at practiceofarchitecture.com/community. Your membership helps support the production of this podcast, Practice Disrupted, and funds the creation of more resources for all of you. Looking forward to growing together. Join us today at practiceofarchitecture.com/community. I want to go back and investigate your perspective as an entrepreneur a little bit. I feel like I talk to a lot of individuals that are starting younger than me. I feel like I'm on the older. Well, I should reframe that. In tech, I feel old. In architecture, I still feel to be on the younger side of things. But I see a lot of people, even mid-career or earlier in architecture, especially a lot of moms or new dads looking to start families and wanting additional flexibility and believing that the best way to go out and do that is through entrepreneurship and by starting their own thing. What are some things that you thought were helpful to you having an architecture background and going into entrepreneurship? And what are some things that you wish you would have known before starting off on your own journey?
I wish I had known everything. No, helpful. Let's start with helpful. Helpful was, I think we have a unique craft or a unique skill because of our craft where we're not afraid of the blank sheet of paper. We are really good and are really well equipped to start from scratch, I think. And that is so valuable because not only, day one of deciding you're going to do this thing, are you starting from scratch, but in the process, you're going to have to kill your darlings a number of times and start from scratch. And that was never hard. It never felt hard. I think this is also something that's a little bit wired in me, but I think paired with that sort of skill set of starting from scratch, it made me even less risk averse. I'm a lot more risk tolerant because I knew, if you think of any sort of architecture project or studio project, the canvas or the tracing paper or whatever the blank medium is, it starts off blank and then you fill it. And then even if you have to scrap it, you're not scrapping everything. You're still picking up pieces of what you put down on the first piece of paper, and it just needs to be put away for a second. So knowing that the paper will always be filled again is a level of risk tolerance I think was a little bit DNA, but also a lot of it trained in the architecture trade and craft. Other things that helped a lot. It's weird to say this because I actually don't think I got this from I can't put my hand on where this came from, but there's a certain sense of business acumen that exists in architecture, kind of just osmotically, that felt like I had But again, I say that, but I understand that like one of the things that oftentimes people criticize of the architecture education is that like there's not enough of that. But somehow I got enough of it to be foolish enough to think that I could go start my own business, with just a little bit help from YouTube or whatever. So I think that was helpful. Things I wish I'd learned more about, or things I wish I'd known more, the business side. I know I'm just going to contradict myself. I wish I'd known more of that. I learned by doing, I learned by making mistakes. I wish I had an understanding of business scale also.
Can you explain a little bit more about that? Because I feel like when you say scale on an architect's podcast and architects think about scale, it's very different than when entrepreneurs, business people think about scale.
Yeah. There's a make or break, and this was the moment I knew I needed to hang up the entrepreneur reins, at least as far as owning my own thing for a minute. There's a moment where you have to decide whether you're going to grow or not. Like if you want more work, you need to bring on a partner or you need to hire. And there's something, and maybe this is maybe because I wasn't in the profession for long enough to have seen this, but certainly it wasn't taught to me. You sort of learn about and observe all of these firms kind of as scale, like with scale agnostic lenses. Like there's a certain level of to the student being educated in architecture, and even to like the early practitioner. Lake Plato Architects in San Antonio and Austin is the same size as Payette in Boston. Like in your mind, like when you look at the work, you have no idea what like size those people or those companies are. And even, I don't know, again, I'm completely out of the loop here. So forgive me if like the star architect conversation is not still being had in the profession. But at the time, there was still the single genius of the architect. And so you hear these names and you don't register that like these names have hundreds of people behind them, hundreds of employees. And so the sense of scale as far as what it looked like to make a business work, make a business last was completely off. And having a better sense of that would have helped quite a bit. And then also, and I realized this pretty quickly, so I don't necessarily feel like I missed it, but I've watched a lot of my colleagues and friends who have since left the profession. I've watched them have to cultivate this from themselves and gotten to be a part of helping some of them cultivate it. But one of the things that I think we leave on the table is just the superpower that is our architecture education. And like that thing, that's one of the things I think I wish I had known more of is like, oh, here's what I'm actually learning. Like, yeah, the outcome is a building, but that's not what I'm learning. That learned knowledge can be applied to a lot of different outcomes all across the marketplace, and it's extremely valuable. That's the bit that I wish I had known even more, even as someone who picked up on that pretty quickly.
I would love to get your opinion on what you have to say to the naysayers who come in and say, I need my architecture graduates to know how to put together a construction documentation set relative to what you found most valuable in architecture education.
I would ask them if they see a future profession that has enough jobs to sustain such a specialized skill set. If the profession needs more architects, then that's what you need your graduates to do. If the profession doesn't need more architects, honestly, and can't sustain more architects, then you've got to equip your graduates to do something more than just build. Because in education, and I know this having talked to hundreds of educators, everything you teach, you fail to teach something else. For everything you add, you're subtracting something else. So we're playing this game of a necessary game. We have to figure out what is the most valuable thing to equip every graduate with. But that decision needs to be made based on a lot of factors. And one of them is, the value of the knowledge set. I don't know if this is the case now, but at the time, and I realized it pretty quickly after I left, and by pretty quickly, I mean within the first year, I out-earned myself the first year working for myself. I wasn't even like going anywhere else. Just like I significantly out-earned myself. So then you ask, okay, cool. What is the market value of learning how to, make these construction documents? And can that be taught somewhere else? Can that actually be taught in a firm context?
Well, the irony of that is, right, then, like, I feel like those people were honestly brought up in a more apprenticed practice. So are we supposed to be learning that in school, or are we supposed to be learning that on the job is always also kind of my point of view? And AXP hours have to go somewhere.
Yeah. And I think we would be doing architecture a disservice if we just turned it into a trade school. And I say that as someone who's like, one, has high respect for the trades, and two, has a lot of criticism to say about the profession. But I do think that to turn the education purely into a trade education is leaving a lot of what a design education is on the table and relegating that to other places like art schools, which again, super valuable. Maybe that's the place that design needs to live, and not necessarily in architecture. It needs to live in art now, because that's where the questions are being asked in a way that society and culture needs them to be asked. But I just think we have time to not do that. Like, we don't have to do that.
Has your perspective on alternative careers changed or grown at all? You continue your love of space, but like, has that narrative for you changed at all?
Not really. I would still advise any student or young practitioner to keep an ear out for their own internal voices and the things that are telling them what they love and what they enjoy, and then to keep an eye out on the marketplace for the places where those voices can live and live happily and live and flourish. I think that there is, again, like, you don't have to look very far to find all the examples of people who have used our skill sets in some remarkable ways. And I think one of the things that the fears that I encountered a lot with talking to older professionals when I was effectively a child. I was like 23, being like, I want to do something different, which is fine. But, the fear was like, if everybody pursues the alternative practice route, we won't have any more architects. I'm like, that's just not true. That's just not correct. There are people whose heart and eyes and life flourishes in the practicing of architecture, capital A, with a license. And I know those people. I can name them. I came up with them. They're still friends of mine. But to assume that all of us are those people, that's just not fair. And to create a condition that is hostile towards those of us who are not those people is also not fair and not great. And I use that word hostile on purpose because I found it hostile while I was there. Not to mention that if we look at the people who are, and this is, not to get into it too much, but this is another sort of factor of the alternative practice model or alternative practice conversation. The people who, there's the internal desire of like, I just want to do something different. There's something more, there's something different, bigger, whatever. Then there's the sort of market desire of, I can't get paid enough doing architecture. And unfortunately, the people who are saying that often are people coming from low income families, people who are brown and black, and people who are women. So if we're creating a hostile environment for the idea of alternative practice, if we're creating institutions that aren't willing to embrace and provide opportunities in development, in leadership, in exposure to those people, then we're also inherently creating a hostile environment for low income people from low income backgrounds, brown and black people, and women. That Venn diagram is damn near a circle. So you've got to ask, you can't have one conversation without having. I found that you couldn't have one conversation without having the other one.
No, I agree. And I'm right there with you on the alternative career track. What I've actually found interesting is now that I am older in my career and further along and have gone on this path, I find a lot of even mid to late career professionals asking me, like, Evelyn, I've stayed in architecture too long. How do I make the transition now?
What do you say to them?
I help them as best I can. Well, I feel like everybody thinks it's such a hard move away. And I think that we are holding on to things that we shouldn't be holding on to, like, right, the time that we've committed our life to practice already, the credentials that we went through and the money we paid for that extra year in school and for, however number of ARE exams that you had to take to earn that title. We're holding on to the fact that we did so much work to earn the title. How could we ever think about leaving the profession? But if it's not where you're happy, and my hope is that people are truly pursuing things that they're happy and passionate about, then that's a conversation that I think everyone should be open to.
I think so. I think that it's, I've again, like I said, come to a point where I'm also getting phone calls and messages from friends who've been in and are looking out. And I think part of it is, unfortunately, it's an exposure conversation. You mentioned, like, the sunk cost of time, or the sunk cost fallacy, I should say, of time lost. And again, like I wouldn't do it differently. I would not get a different degree. I would not get a different education. I would not practice differently. I learned and use everything that I've learned on a daily basis. The credentials are proof of concept for anyone else hiring. They might not understand the credential, but they see it and they know that it means something. But part of the challenge is, in the places where we learn how to architect, we don't see anything else. And even when like people are invited to this, I think about like AIA conferences in the past, like to make it on a prominent stage at AIA Con, not as an architect, you've got to be Michelle Obama, which is a really high bar. Like it's either like going to be some star architect or some like award-winning, architecture, capital A architect, or Michelle Obama. And that's tough. A lot of people aren't Michelle Obama and have a lot of valuable things to say to a room full of architects, or ways to inspire, ways to engage. And it's really kind of bummer to see that that is still sort of in some ways being left on the table. But
well, and I think there's also that mention back to what you were talking about, this hostile environment, right? That if you leave the profession, you're considered less than too. So
core memory, and I won't name a name, but I had a older Black architect who was proximate to me, and I would sort of say a budding mentor. And this was at a hotel lobby in Boston at an ACSA board meeting or something. And I sort of mentioned in conversation, sort of with a group of other people, that after my sort of AIS year, I was planning on exploring some other career path. And I basically said I knew at that point that I was probably never going to get my license. And his response to me was that I was squandering the sacrifices of every Black architect who fought for me to get where I am. And I'll never forget how small I felt in that moment and how much shame I felt in that moment. And that was, for me, the moment that solidified that I was not going to do this thing, because it told me that unless I fit this mold, a very specific idea of what architecture and architect was, that I was never actually going to be accepted in this community. And it sort of validated everything that I had felt and sensed up to that point. And that was it. So hostile really is, and I don't know that I've ever said hostile before out loud, but it did feel really hostile the entire time that I was in it, knowing that I didn't want to be, or knowing that it didn't want to accept me for what I was and wanted to be.
So you just asked me, what do I say to people? Like, what is your advice to people that want to get out and do something else? And how do they begin that journey?
Yeah, I usually say it's not a binary. It's not all or nothing. You don't have to do it all tomorrow. You can dabble. You can experiment, and you can discover. I think one of the things that, and this isn't just architecture, we don't want to vilify architecture. One of the things that the working world does to us is the second we come out of a studio or a pedagogy, we stop being curious, and we stop experimenting, we stop trying, we stop failing, and it becomes about security for security's sake. And a lot of people do have things to be secure for, families, children, but it doesn't have to be all or nothing. I usually just encourage people to try something, whatever that something is. There are a few, she doesn't know this, maybe she does, but one of the people that I'm constantly inspired by is Amy Parencio. Amy was the AIS president. God, I don't even know when. Before me, generally speaking, before me. And, one day, a number of years ago, I sort of was like bopping around Instagram, and Instagram was like, oh, you should follow Amy Parencio. And I followed her in her Instagram, and I realized at that time that she was making her own clothes. Still an architect, still practicing, but designing and making and sewing her own clothes. And when I tell you that her stuff is so impressive, I'm not talking just like, clothes as a means of covering the skin and nothing else. Like, she's designing fashion and then sitting at her dining room table in her studio and making these pieces, but still fully practicing. Things like that are really inspiring, because again, she has no idea, but I definitely see a world where she could wake up tomorrow and be like, you know what? I'm going to hang up this other thing. I'm going to take this thing up. I could do this full time now. I can, because she sort of experimented and started with a passion that she just explored. So I usually tell people it's not a binary. It's not this or that. It doesn't have to be, at least. You don't actually have to take the leap. And that's another thing, unfortunate false narrative that we put on entrepreneurship, is just like, jump. It's okay. Sometimes there's stairs. Like, sometimes it's a slide. It doesn't have to be a full free fall and hope that the net's there.
So what is your hope? Because you still love space. You obviously still have a love for architecture and the background it provided you in crafting who you are today and what you do as a creative director. What's your hope for the future of practice if it could be in a better place in 5 to 10 years from now?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I struggle because I stopped desiring anything for the profession about 8 years ago. So, because again, like it wasn't a place that wanted me. So like, why would I waste my energy on that place? And I feel that. I don't know why I feel the feel compelled to say that again. But if I can think back to, what 24 or 5-year-old Obi would have wanted and project that 10 years into the future, 20 years into the future, I'm going to give two answers and they're going to negate each other. On one hand, I would love to see a more sort of holistic and accepting profession. I would love to see a profession that was not afraid to invite people into the room who are simply high-level appreciators and valuers of architecture and the work, even if they've never practiced a single day of their lives. I'd love to see the profession engage in and lead discussions about topics and spaces that are extremely tangential to architecture. There's a lot of conversations happening about third space and hospitality right now. Cities are suffering for a lack of third space and public space. And I still see a lot of other trades and associations owning those conversations that we could be a part of, or we could host at least. I don't think anyone owns these conversations, but hosting these conversations, I'd love to see that. I'd love to see a less ego-driven profession, because that I still know is still part of the equation there. And on the other hand, my other answer is maybe architecture is not supposed to be any of those things. Maybe, and this is after coming to it and not desiring anything for the profession for a while now, maybe I was asking this thing to be something that it was never meant to be and was never going to be. And that's also probably maybe okay in the long run. There will always be Evelyns and Obis and, there are always going to be those people, and they'll always find their place somewhere else. And maybe it's okay that we sort of are kickstarted by architecture, but not necessarily sustained. Maybe that's fine. And that I say that now after lots of years of therapy and being able to let go of the person that I thought I was supposed to be and just be like, hey, you know what? It's cool. I started here. I didn't finish here. I'm grateful for here. I'm grateful for architecture. And maybe that's all. Maybe that's okay.
Hi, Disruptors. Thank you for joining us today on an episode of Practice Disrupted. If you like the content for today's show, you can find all of our past episodes over on practiceofarchitecture.com/podcast. Be a part of the conversation by joining me, our speakers, and other disruptors in our community at practiceofarchitecture.com/community. Our social media handle is Practice of Arch. That's Practice of ARCH. We'd love to hear from you, so feel free to drop us a DM and say hello. Tune in next week for a new conversation on change in the profession.